In the aftermath of the October 25th, 2023 mass shooting in Lewiston, Maine, people from across the country came out to support the survivors and the families of victims. 18 people were senselessly murdered that night, another 13 gravely wounded, and dozens more sustained psychological injuries that endure to this day. Generous individuals and businesses from Maine and all over the United States made sometimes massive financial contributions to help the victims recover. Many wrote checks to the city of Lewiston, while others gave to the local Chamber of Commerce. A website controlled by Maine Governor Janet Mills directed contributions to the Maine Community Foundation, a well-known 501c3 charitable organization. And eventually, MCF became the unofficial charity for all money flowing toward the Lewiston shooting recovery effort. As the survivors were recovering and the families of victims were making funeral arrangements, the Maine Community Foundation was accepting donations from all over the country. In total, the foundation received 5,241 donations, totaling more than $6.6 million. Yet, when that money was fully dispersed, just $4.7 million ended up going to victims, families, and survivors. The rest of the money, nearly $2 million, flowed to a host of nonprofits and NGOs, many of which have nothing to do with the Lewiston shooting recovery effort. Now, survivors of the shooting and family members of victims are calling on the foundation to explain how money raised in the name of Lewiston shooting victims ended up going to organizations that did nothing at all to help the survivors or the Lewiston-Auburn area recovery effort. Although the foundation has issued statements on its webpage explaining away the controversy, and the local media has more or less bought that version of events, questions linger over exactly how $1.9 million was siphoned out of the Lewiston shooting fundraising and given to nonprofits, including nonprofits that are facing allegations of fraud, nonprofits that no longer exist, and nonprofits that were connected to each other through the incestuous network of migrant services agencies. In this exclusive interview, we talked with Amy Sussman, whose nephew Max Hathaway was murdered in the Lewiston shooting. More than anyone, Amy has been investigating exactly how $1.9 million found its way into the coffers of nonprofits that did little, if anything, to benefit victims of the shooting. We talked with Max's older sister, Kelsey, as well as survivors of the shooting rampage, including Destiny Johnson of Wyndham, who escaped that night without being shot, but whose psychological injuries endure. We talked with Ben Dyer and Jennifer Zanka, both of whom were shot that evening and went through lengthy hospital stays. While they're grateful for the support they've received from the donors who gave to the Maine Community Foundation, they're angry that money raised in their names was instead given to nonprofits, and their concerns are only multiplied by the fact that MCF refuses to meet with them or hear their concerns, and in some cases won't even respond to their emails.
My name is Amy Sussman, and my nephew Max Hathaway was one of the 18 killed in the Lewiston shooting. He was my sister's only son, and he was just 35 years old, had 2 children, and his wife was pregnant with their third. And on that day of the shooting, he received his college diploma. And they went out to Schmenge's to celebrate. So I started looking into the foundation and the fundraising done by the Maine Community Foundation around about August of 2024, because someone handed me the Maine Ties Spring 2024 edition. And on the front cover is a picture of the candlelight vigil, and inside is an article about the fundraising that was done. I noticed in there it looked like one fund raised $6.6 million, 5,241 donors, 162 individual recipients, and 29 nonprofits. And I didn't quite understand that. I put it away for a while, but it kept bugging me. So then I pulled it out and started looking at the nonprofit part of that fund, because no one in my family had known that there was a nonprofit part to that fund. my sister, my nephew's wife, Brenda, and my nephew's two sisters all told me this fund, the Lewiston Auburn Area Response Fund, is 100% going to the victims and family members and survivors of the shooting. So if you have anyone to tell, if anyone wants to give, that's where you can give, because everyone will benefit from that. So that's the assumption we went with until I saw that publication, realized maybe that's not really true. So I started looking at the list of nonprofits that were awarded $65,522. And in the amount of time it's taken me over a year, I've learned that people who were at the shooting, but were not shot, but escaped without being shot, received $7,000 from the fund. Some who were shot but survived received $30,000 to $32,000. I don't know what everyone received, but I know a couple, which seemed just way off that nonprofits received that amount of money. So I also started calling the nonprofits starting in August and asking them what did you do with the funds? And some notables I called. There were about 9 of them, I think, that are mostly for immigrants, the immigrant population. And I didn't really think it would be worth calling them. I tried the first one and it was permanently closed. So I didn't try too many more. Most of them I got no answers. So I don't think I spoke with anyone last year when I called each of those.
So in the aftermath of the shooting, there was a tremendous outpouring of people wanting to find a way to help. And they created the Lewiston Auburn Area Response Fund as the legitimate fundraising vehicle, so that you didn't have a ton of GoFundMes. I guess the idea was to pour that charitable impulse into one vetted, very transparent, gold standard charitable organization. And that was the Maine Community Foundation.
Right. But there were GoFundMes. There were other ways to give also. The governor had about 10 or 11 ways to give on her website. The Maine Community Foundation's Lewiston Auburn Area Response Fund was one of them. When I looked at those opportunities to give, not one of them was 100% for the victims and family members and survivors. However, it was maybe to a school or to University of Maine or to a law group or to a mortgage company, but none specifically for the people who were in the buildings. But because the Maine Community Foundation said, yes, we will do this, and I believe the governor asked them to, that became the main source. So that, I think, took front seat in the news.
How much total went to victims and their families, people who were the families of people who were murdered that night and people who were injured or people who were there, versus to these nonprofits who had no relationship whatsoever to the trauma?
So $3.29 million was given to the 18 victims' families. Another 1.4 plus million was given to everyone else who was shot and survived or escaped without being shot. And I think the total number of people there was maybe 152. I think I saw that on the news, 152 to maybe 160, I'm not sure. And then 1.9 million went to the 29 nonprofits. So about 28% went to the nonprofits.
In looking at these nonprofits, did you find any nonprofit that had what you thought was a persuasive reason for tapping into money raised in the names of Lewiston shooting victims?
Community Concepts, they started the Maine Resiliency Center. And so I believe they funded it initially. And so that made sense to me. There were 3, maybe 4 that provide counseling. But I called those and asked as a family member of a victim, would I receive any reduced charge for counseling? And none of them said yes. And you would think after a shooting, that would be the main thing people would want to give to. And they have 3 or 4 on the list, but they weren't giving a reduced, they wanted my insurance information and nobody said yes. One said they used the money to open a new office.
And so this would be in addition to the taxpayer-funded resiliency centers that were created and funded by the legislature. In addition to that, they're tapping into Maine Community Foundation money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hate to pick on them. I grew up in a YMCA, but I called the YWCA because in my mind I thought, oh, here's an opportunity for them to really do something good for the families who were involved in this. So I called and asked what they did with the funds, and the executive director of the YWCA told me they used the funds to put a wall up in their entrance and to put up some cameras. And she shared that they had been wanting to get that work done for a long time. And I thought, all I could think of was you could offer memberships to people. You could offer babysitting. You could offer, there's so much a YWCA. You could offer swimming lessons. You could offer a reduced or free membership. I was extremely disappointed in that. And I didn't feel like my nephew and his murder and the murder of 17 more should result in you checking off a box on your list of things you want to get done in your building.
Were there any migrants involved in the Lewiston shooting?
There was not. There were none.
So what justification have you been given for this money flowing into these nonprofits?
I spoke with the consultant who the Maine Community Foundation hired. I spoke with him at the end of September in 2024 and asked, why was this done? Why did you include all these nonprofits? Why was there a nonprofit part to this fund? And his answer to me was, when something like this happens, it affects the whole community. So someone across the street, or he said to me, my sister or my nephew's sisters would not benefit from the victim family member portion of the fund, but through the nonprofit portion, they would benefit. So I challenged him from that list of 29 to find one that would help my sister or Max's sisters. And his response was, well, he wasn't really a part of that part of the fund. I said, well, I don't see that happening.
So the consultant for Maine Community Foundation initially tried to justify it and then backpedaled.
No, he still justifies it. He just says he wasn't a part of that. He didn't choose the nonprofit. So then I asked him, by the way, how is it possible that 6 of the 10-member committee choosing the nonprofits received money for their own nonprofits? And his response to me was, well, there are only a certain number of people who are able to do this work. And I found that pretty offensive, offensive to the Lewiston, Auburn area, offensive to the state of Maine. And if I were on that committee, if I were on a committee to choose nonprofits to receive money from this, I would have to exempt my own nonprofit. And there may be a 7th who received funds for a spouse's nonprofit. I haven't really dug down deep into that. It feels like self-dealing to me, and it's certainly a conflict of interest for them.
Did the committee have any conflict of interest policy, or does the Maine Community Foundation have a conflict of interest policy?
I don't know.
No.
I do not know that.
Because this would seem to be like a pretty glaring violation of any basic conflict of interest.
Yeah,
policy.
I've only spoken with one person. I spoke up with one person at the MCF in August of 2024, their marketing and communications director. And we spoke for half an hour just when I first started looking into this. He answered a lot of questions for me, but some things he either couldn't or wouldn't answer, but told me I would hear from somebody else. And I never did. I am told now by the COO of the MCF that I did receive an email from the chair of the steering committee, but I don't recall getting it. Perhaps I did, and I didn't recognize the email address. Maybe it went into spam. But were I reaching out, and I did this with a consultant, I called twice and then I emailed once. I gave it 3 good tries with 2 different methods before I then check the box and say this person isn't going to respond to me. So I never communicated with them again, other than some emails with the COO.
Why was the Maine Community Foundation selected for this role?
That's a good question. I don't have the answer to that. Last November, I first started emailing the governor, Governor Mills, And I had a list of questions, and that was one of them. Who tasked the MCF with this work? And I could never get that question answered. I communicated with her office 14 times. The first 4 times went unanswered until I reached out to Senator Collins, and her staffer, I guess, nudged the governor's office to get in touch with me. So I did speak with a staffer in the governor's office, but I didn't get answers to, I don't think, many of the questions I asked. I even asked, what were the parameters around this? This was 28% going to nonprofits. If it had been 50%, is that acceptable? If 70% had gone to nonprofits, would that be acceptable? That people who were there and survived someone trying to kill them, receiving $7,000, and a museum, each of these 29 nonprofits receiving over $65,000 just doesn't sound right to me. And I wonder if she's looked at that, having tasked them with the work, what were the parameters around it? I could not get any of those answers.
So we don't know if there was any due diligence done on the part of the governor's office, or if she played a role in positioning the Maine Community Foundation as kind of the figurehead, the funnel for all charitable giving around the Lewiston shooting victims.
They wouldn't tell me that she was even involved in choosing them. It was that they are a private organization and she doesn't have oversight of them.
But she did promote the Maine Community
website,
Foundation. Yeah.
I was told she asked them. She was offered to partner with former Governor LePage. Former Governor LePage told me he reached out to her, Governor Mills, right after the shooting and said, I want to raise money for the victims and family members and survivors only. Let's you and I do it. I'm the Republican, you're the Democrat, let's do this. And she said, I'm getting the MCF to do it. And that was last month when I was told that. So I had been asking the question since last November. And finally, last month, I learned the answer from Governor LePage.
So I guess let's go down through the list of the nonprofits that received the $65,000 payment from the Maine Community Foundation. Keeping in mind that this is money that was raised, I think it's fair to say that everyone who clicked donate on that button thought that their money was going directly to a victim's family or to a survivor. Some people who were directly impacted by this, the businesses where this occurred. I think that's a fair assumption. No one donated to this thinking that they were going to give money to the YWCA to build a wall.
Right. That, I think, is fair to say. But to be completely honest and fair, when you went on the website, there were 2 options, victims and family members. And I keep saying victims and family members. I'm always corrected that it's survivors, but that's how it was presented then. So it's victims and family members or nonprofits, or you could give 50-50. But the list of nonprofits was not provided. They hadn't chosen them yet. So there was no way of knowing these nonprofits wouldn't be those that would be helping the victims and family members and survivors. I think later the verbiage changed from just nonprofit to broader recovery effort, which I don't really know what that means. If I were clicking on that, I might think 2 years later, what would be happening with the survivors and the families? That might be the broader recovery that I think would be important to contribute to, not necessarily, geographically broader. I don't really know what that means.
Has the foundation ever published an audit or any details of how money was donated through their website? For example, did it turn out that the amount of money that was given to nonprofits was represented in the amount that people decided to donate by clicking the nonprofit button instead of the families and victims?
The only numbers I've seen is just the total amount that went to the nonprofits.
Okay.
I got curious this summer and thought there were some large givers. There were some companies that gave large amounts of money, and they certainly didn't go on the website, and click one or the other. They sent a check, and I thought, if the MCF received a check, which part of the one fund did that money go? And so one company finally called me back and said, we weren't given an option. We were told by the Maine Community Foundation that they would split the money between the two parts of the fund. They weren't told they could designate one or the other. And I spoke with the co-founder of Victims First, which is a victims advocacy group who is run by people who have all lost someone in a mass shooting. And they've seen this kind of behavior by community foundations and nonprofits that swoop in and scoop up a lot of money that is kept away from victims and family members. And on their website, there's 25-year history of this. And so their motto is 100% in, 100% out for the victims and family members. And you can look at the history on their website of all of this.
It seems to me that the differences between the funds, just like a paper difference. It seems like it was all one bucket of money, and then there was a group of people in charge of it handing out as they saw fit, with some parameters for victims and survivors who applied for it. Was there an application process for nonprofits?
There is an application process, and I think it is on their website. I asked initially, that first conversation when I had with them, I asked, how did you choose them? And I wasn't given that answer. But I do believe now they have it on their website.
The application, or is there a scoring process that was used?
I don't know about that. Yeah, I don't. The parameters, I think, if you are doing X, Y, and Z, then you are eligible to apply. But I did speak with one director of one of the immigrant nonprofits because she was getting a particularly hard time online on social media, and she wasn't really understanding why there was so much anger. And so I asked her if she wanted to talk. And so we talked for almost an hour, and I explained to her when this fundraising was happening, the group of people who were at the shooting, whether they were shot at or family members of those who were killed, did not know money was being raised for nonprofits. They were never told by the Maine Community Foundation. In fact, when I talked to the consultant, I asked him why you didn't tell them. And he said, we did not tell them about the nonprofit part of the fund because that money wasn't for them. When I explained to her the amount of money her nonprofit received compared to what the victims and family members and survivors received, at the end of our conversation, she apologized for applying and felt like she should not have applied for the money. And I asked her, why did you apply? Who told you to apply for the money? And she said, well, within the community, we were told we could apply for this.
This was a migrant nonprofit?
Mm-hmm.
What did she mean by community?
The immigrant community. I'm quite certain.
So a shooting that affects exclusively white native Mainers was used as a justification to raise money from unsuspecting donors to give to migrant nonprofits.
That's exactly
right. That
right.
did nothing to benefit shooting victims or survivors or their families.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
There's obviously been a lot of ruckus raised about this, in no small part because of your investigation. I followed along on the Facebook groups. Mm-hmm. There were calls for some kind of an audit or an attorney general investigation. Seemed like there was broad support for that in the Lewiston Auburn community. What happened with that?
So there was an article in a paper, and it's on the MCF's website, or it was, that it has stood up to their $6.6 million fundraising has stood up to questioning by me. And in the article, the Attorney General said, well, we've not received any complaint, no formal complaint. So I said, okay, then I'll formally complain. And so I didn't suspect that they did anything illegal. I really don't, and didn't. I think it's pretty immoral. I think it's pretty horrible to treat people who've been through what these people have been through, to stand there and not tell them the truth. I think that's pretty awful. But I filed a request for them to look into it. And so it took about 2 months. And what I got back was there was nothing illegal done because people who gave to nonprofits, that intent was honored. They were giving to nonprofits, and that's what happened. I questioned back, how do you know what happened to the money of big companies that was given that was given to the MCF, which part of the fund did that go to? How do you know those monies? How do you know for those monies that the intent was honored? And how do you know to the person who gave to the nonprofit piece, how do you know what their intent truly was? I'm pretty certain it wasn't for this list of 29 nonprofits. But those answers, they were never investigated. They never looked any further, and I didn't get any further response.
How many of these nonprofits, now that the issue has been made perfectly clear, have returned the money to the Maine Community Foundation?
None. No, none to my knowledge. The Maine Community Foundation's attitude, I believe, is we've done this work. They call it two separate funds. That's what they're hang their hat really on. To me, it doesn't look like two separate funds. Did it have two separate bank accounts? I don't know. But there are lots of written material to the victims and family members and survivors that they were getting 100% of this fund, the Lewiston Auburn Area Response Fund. I did notice further away from the actual shooting and further away from the start of their fundraising that they started changing some of the verbiage. So you might see Lewiston Auburn Area Victims Fund, or you might see Lewiston Auburn Area Broad Recovery Effort Fund or something like that. But the application that my nephew's wife Brenda got to apply for the victims part of the fund says Lewiston Auburn Area Response Fund. And these are the people who are eligible. People at the shooting. Nowhere did it talk about nonprofits.
And I noticed in looking over some of the material that the foundation put out, they put out very, very specific criteria for who was eligible for what about, down to the, drawing geomaps around the locations. And you had to be very, very specific in your application. Mm-hmm. We don't know of anything like that for the nonprofits.
Not that I'm aware of. If it's not on their website, and I to be perfectly honest, I have a hard time going on the website because when I look at the list of nonprofits and what is reported that they did with the money, for instance, the YWCA, because I literally talked to them, that is not what's listed on their website. So I don't go on their website and look at that information and think that I'm finding truth.
It seems like it's a pretty classic bait and switch. And it's interesting that the Attorney General would say that he can't look into it because there's been no complaint. When the Attorney General's office has filed amicus briefs about, Medicaid policy in West Virginia and has sued ExxonMobil, there's all kinds of room for activities by the Attorney General's office in the absence of a complaint from a Mainer. But it also seems like there's a role for protecting people from scam charities that do a bait and switch like this. It sounds like you had a bunch of people who donated money thinking that they were going to be helping victims and survivors, and instead the money was skimmed for politically connected nonprofits.
There was even money given to the city of Lewiston. People, I think, immediately just sent a check to Lewiston, and Lewiston wasn't prepared for that. So they, giving the money to the Androscoggin Bank, the Androscoggin Bank then sent the money to the Chamber of Commerce. And the Chamber of Commerce used part of the money for immediate needs, bills that were immediately due or things like that. And then the bulk of it, about maybe $190,000, went to the Maine Community Foundation. And so I've asked the city of Lewiston, I've asked the Chamber of Commerce. Well, the Chamber of Commerce won't call me back, but I asked the city of Lewiston 3 good times now, which part of the fund did that money go? Because you're not honoring intent. If people gave money to you, wanting it to go to the survivors and family members of those who were killed, and it went to the nonprofit piece, you are not honoring their intent. They won't answer. I think I finally emailed the city administrator for the 3rd time a couple of weeks ago and said, could you just confirm that you're not going to answer that question for me? Then I'll stop asking.
You seem like a calm, reasonably informed person. I don't know why they would want to respond to your inquiries.
I'm just the aunt of a guy that was killed, trying to figure out what happened. And I hear my sister saying they raised money for nonprofits on the backs of 18 people who were murdered. I feel like the Maine Community Foundation used this as an event, and this wasn't their event. They do great things in this state. I never want to discount that. And of course, we appreciate the help that they did provide, money that was given. It wasn't given by the MCF, but they did the fundraising for it. But this level of, I guess I have to say, dishonesty to the people standing in front of them is really, really troubling. And I'm just asking questions, and I have opinions about it, but truly, you can have an opinion that's different, but not until you know all the facts, not until we know exactly how this all happened. And when there are survivors who didn't know that there was a nonprofit part of this fund until a year later when I told them. I was criticized in the media by, not you, but some media, because I was the only one who felt this way. And I said, well, I'd never wanted the survivors and the family members to take this on, because this is re-victimizing for them. They should never have to be a part of this. Now, 2 years out, some are ready to really take this on. But a year out, nobody was. And as I'm talking to a reporter, not you, he said to me, well, I need more than just you. Do you have anybody else who? And I said, well, I'm not a reporter. Let's see how this works. Like you share the facts, the news, and then people can make opinions about it. I thought that's how it worked.
What would you like to see done? What makes this right in your view?
In my view, what makes it right is the total $6.6 million is given to the survivors and the family members of those killed. That's what was promised to them. That's what they were told multiple times. It's what the social workers told them, that the 100% of that fund is going to them. Maybe the MCF followed the advice of the consultant that they used. And so that's what they will fall back on. But when I was a kid, if I said to my mom, well, he told me to do that. My friend told me to do that. Even a friend who's smarter and I paid for the information. If I'm standing in front of a group of people who were shot at, or a family member of someone who was killed, and I'm telling them the 100% of this fund is going to them, and never telling them that I'm doing also a part of this fund for nonprofits, I can't feel good about that. And I don't know how they can feel good about that. So I, in my heart, think $1.9 million needs to be set up for the ongoing needs of the people affected by the shooting. I'm never saying that Lewiston and Auburn was not affected by this, by the broader community was not affected. But 2 years out, these are the people who are affected, the people who are in that building and the family members of those who didn't survive. My nephew's wife wakes up every day knowing her husband is gone, has to figure out how to explain to a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old their dad's not ever coming back. And the 1-year-old never met him. And for our family specifically, Max's oldest child was moved out of state by her mom. He shared her with an ex-partner. And we have no contact with that now 13-year-old. That is the longstanding effect of this shooting. That happened because of this shooting. I don't think anyone else in the community wakes up with those sorts of problems, with those sorts of trauma, but the people who were at the shooting, and they are the ones that truly, truly matter.
So there were a couple of different charitable endeavors to raise money for the victims and survivors of the shooting. We could set Governor LePage's effort aside for now, but there was an outpouring of support from people in the community, people offering to help in any way that they can, often at great personal expense. Do you know of any of these businesses or neighbors or community members who sought reimbursement through the foundation in the way that these nonprofits did?
I'm not aware of any of those.
Has the Maine Community Foundation ever talked about reimbursements that they made to people in the community who sprung into action like that?
I don't know. I wouldn't probably hear of it anyway, but I don't know.
Well, you'd think they would brag about it or publicize that effort on their website.
They certainly
especially
are taking a lot of credit in there.
publications.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love that on the front cover of that is the Candlelight Vigil. I don't love that that's their marketing material, but they did the fundraising for it, so I guess fair enough, they can use it.
So how many fundraisers did they hold, and what was the role of the survivors or victims in helping them to raise the money?
How many fundraisers did the MCF hold?
Yeah, I guess can you describe or characterize their efforts to raise money?
All I know is they created this website. I don't know how they marketed it.
So it was mostly online.
Yeah, through the
donations.
Media.
They didn't hold like galas or big events where there's lots of overhead costs and a foundation would come in and actually have some expenses.
Yeah.
They really just put up a website, and the publicity and attention from the event itself drove the donations.
Right. I'm not aware of them doing any of that for this fund. There was a nonprofit, Cadence Kitchen, which is fairly new, which right after the shooting they did help. They provided diapers and formula, and in a social media posting, he stated that he saw that he could apply for funds from the shooting. He just didn't feel that was appropriate, and he wanted that money to go to those who were affected by it.
So, sorry, I'm hung up on this. There were no actual fundraisers done. So the extent of Maine Community Foundation's work was to create a website.
I'm not sure. The only thing I know about is the website. I don't really know how. I don't really know. I don't think a lot of us, I don't think a lot of family members were looking at that necessarily.
Yeah. Which almost compounds the taking advantage of the victims.
Yeah, I mean, a year later, they still didn't know about the nonprofit part of it. And I was shocked when I saw it in August. The shooting was in October.
And when did you learn about the nonprofits that they were going to be getting a chunk of this money?
In August of 2024. They had already gotten it.
I meant I guess in what kind of setting? How were you informed that the nonprofits would be getting, $1.6 million?
When a friend of mine handed me their Maine Ties publication, and I read the article, and it looked like it states in bold letters 29 nonprofits were recipients of this fund.
So the ones that are listed, I guess this is the steering committee. Nathan Davis of Gateway Community Services Maine, a nonprofit that also has a for-profit arm. They received money from the foundation.
Yeah. Yep. Gateway did.
Tree Street Youth.
Yes. Yep. I
think a counselor at Tree Street was just recently arrested for selling drugs.
Wow.
The Somali Bantu Community Association.
They receive funds.
So Muhyiddin Laiba of the Somali Bantu Community Association was on the Broad Recovery and Organizations Fund for steering committee for the Lewiston Auburn Area Response Fund, and steered money to the United Somali Women's Fund.
Steering committee is the proper name for that.
It really is. That's dark, but apropos.
It's just a head shaker. I don't know how you have a way of.
Who was the consultant that you dealt with?
I spoke with Jeff Dion.
And
he calls this later in an article, and I forget who wrote it. This was a model in how this should be done. And I thought, the result is probably not I don't think that's the model, but he was in charge of it. So I guess, you can't say it wasn't done well when he was the one that directed it and consulted with them.
How much was he paid for his services?
I do not know that. And I think maybe they covered the cost of that. I don't know. I think they continued to say 100. They didn't take any administrative fee out of the fundraising. So perhaps they covered the cost of him. I don't know, or maybe the state did. I don't know. Since I only spoke with them the one time, and that was well over a year ago. So I don't know.
Did the state give any money directly to survivors or victims' families?
There was a $15,000 victims fund that if you're a victim of a violent crime that you're eligible for. And so I believe each person got $15,000. There were 2 nonprofits of the 29 that are run by the same person. One is for prison reform, and the other is a theater group for ex-cons. They're run by an ex-con who was convicted of, I believe, manslaughter, killed a person with a gun. He served either 17 or 19 years. He received $65,522 for each of his nonprofits.
So the largest recipient of funding on the nonprofit side was an individual who went to jail for gun violence.
Yep.
And this is a foundation raised for victims of gun violence.
Yep. You know, he may be a great person. Those nonprofits may be doing great things, but
I'm
that
sure.
sounds icky to me.
Yeah.
And it's really, really hard. Like, I can do this because I'm the aunt of a victim. I could not do this if Max was my son. And throughout the year, if I reached out to every elected official I could think of, from the city, Lewiston City Council, up through the governor's office, I went to state senators, both U.S. senators, representatives. And each time telling the story, I would start to break down toward the end, talking about Max and his family, which is probably why not a lot of people are doing this. But being an aunt, I'm able to do that. And I think that people need to know when they give money what happens. Plain and simple.
What would you say to the Maine Community Foundation?
Here's how I view this. After this shooting, we know the police should have done better. The Army Reserves should have done better. And in my heart, I believe each of them, had they known this would happen, would have done better. They would have stopped this if they had truly known this was going to happen. They're still responsible, but I believe that they would have done better had they truly known. What I find so incredibly difficult is that the Maine Community Foundation came in already knowing what happened, in a room full of people that this happened to, and they didn't tell them the whole truth about what they were doing because of what happened to them. I know the city of Lewiston and the city of Auburn probably need a lot of help. They needed, all these nonprofits probably needed a little bump. But that's the Maine Community Foundation's work to do. Not to do it on the backs of 18 people who were killed and 13 more who were shot, and however many more were in the buildings and escaped without being shot. That they were intentionally not told because the money wasn't for them is unconscionable to me. To look at those people in the face and know that you're not telling them everything. And I think of it like if I'm in I want to say a car wreck or something, so I drive home tonight, and someone comes up to me and says, I'm going to help you. And they're thinking, but I'm going to help that person and that person and that person. I'm not going to tell you that. And I might help them more than you because this happened to you. As my sister said to me the other day, if they wanted to raise money for nonprofits, don't do it at the same time as a shooting. Her son was murdered. There are 3 children without a dad and a mom who was 7.5 months pregnant at the time, trying to parent these kids. And we're still trying to find his oldest. I feel like they took advantage of their survivors and the families of those who were killed to raise money for this community. They're a community foundation, and I feel like they used it as an event. Make it right. Do what you can. Do what you said you would do. Make it 100% to the victims and family members and survivors. That's what you told them.
Wow.
I really think nonprofits have a mission. And if your need falls within the purview of that mission, then that's what they're for. They are there to lend a hand. They are not there to stand in line for a handout from a shooting. And that's what I feel happened. And to the governor's office and to the governor, if you have nothing to hide, then don't hide it. If you ask the Maine Community Foundation to do this work, then say it. And tell us what the parameters were around it. If there weren't any, then admit it. And if this didn't go the way the MCF thought it should or would, then just say it. Just say, we followed the advice of an expert and this is what he thought we should do. And so we did. Maybe we wouldn't do it this way again. And that's why it's important to take a look after something like this. Because if we don't hold them accountable to this sort of fundraising, then it will continue to happen. The Baltimore Community Foundation raised $16 million after the Key Bridge in Baltimore collapsed when when a container ship ran into it, went right into the water, major thoroughfare around Baltimore. They raised $16 million after that accident, and not one dime went to any of the 6 family members, the people who were killed. There were 6 people killed. Not one dime went to their families. Not one dime went to the 2 people who were injured in that accident. They were called out for it. And 3 days later, the next article was they found $1.2 million to give to those families of the people killed and to the 2 victims who were injured. It shouldn't take that. Nonprofits coming in to say, I'm going to help you, should help you. And a nonprofit's part of their mission, part of their job is to do such important and compelling work that they can market themselves and raise their funds, not wait for a mass shooting to stand in line for more money.
When we reached out to the Maine Community Foundation and asked that they be part of this video series, they declined and instead pointed us to their website. They did not answer our questions. They did not say, for example, why 4 members of the Lewiston Shooting Fund Steering Committee were allowed to steer money to their own nonprofits. They did not say whether there was any conflict of interest policy for the steering committee. They did not say whether they did any due diligence on the groups that received more than $65,000 apiece in donor money that was unmistakably given for the survivors. And they didn't say whether they were aware that some of the groups that they gave money to no longer exist. Some share the same migrant agency office address in Lewiston, and some are run by an ex-con who went to prison for gun violence. As questions swirl about the Maine Community Foundation, how it handled $6.6 million in donations, and the panoply of nonprofits that took tens of thousands of dollars in donor money meant to help victims of Maine's worst mass shooting, we think it's important to hear from the victims and their families so that the people of Maine can decide whether the foundation, Maine's foremost charitable giving foundation, and its nonprofit partners have handled themselves with candor and integrity, or whether they took advantage of an unprecedented tragedy to steer cash into politically connected NGOs.